Welcome to Ghostmire, where every night a new horror story drags you deeper than the last. Before anything else, hit subscribe right now. If you miss even one night, you'll miss the piece that connects all these stories into something far darker. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know exactly who's awake inside the dark with us. And listen carefully. This story has something hidden. A moment so disturbing, so unexpected that most people don't recognize it until the very end. If you leave early, you'll never know what really happened. So stay with me, all the way to the final second. Dr. Michael Bradford had been hauling freight across the country for 23 years, and his sleeper cab was his sanctuary. On April 7, 2019, he was parked at a rest stop outside Amarillo, Texas, catching a few hours of sleep before his final push to Albuquerque. His Kenworth T680 was equipped with a comfortable sleeping berth, blackout curtains, and everything he needed for rest. Michael woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sensation of weight on his chest. Not sleep paralysis, which he'd experienced before, but actual physical pressure, like someone sitting on him. He opened his eyes in the darkness and saw nothing, but the weight remained, heavy and deliberate. His breath came in short gasps as he struggled against the invisible mass pinning him down. Then he heard breathing that wasn't his own. Slow, measured breaths coming from inches above his face. The air that washed over him was cold and carried a smell like rotting meat left in summer heat. Michael tried to move, but his arms were pressed against his sides by whatever was on top of him. The breathing grew louder, more deliberate, as if whatever was there was savoring his fear. Michael managed to twist his head to the side and saw the curtain separating the sleeper cab from the front cab moving. Something was back there with him, something that had climbed into his locked truck while he slept. The weight shifted and he felt what could only be described as fingers touching his face, tracing the contours of his features with skin that felt like cold leather. He screamed and thrashed, finally breaking free from the paralysis. Michael lunged forward, crashed through the curtain into the driver's seat and hit the dome lights. The cab flooded with illumination. He spun around to look at the sleeper berth, expecting to see an intruder. The space was empty, completely empty. But his sheets were compressed in the exact shape of a human form, as if someone had been lying on top of them, the indentations still visible. Michael checked every lock, every window, every possible entry point. All secure, nothing had been tampered with. He was alone in the truck, yet the smell lingered, that putrid odor of decay. His sheets were still warm where the impressions showed body temperature, as if something with mass and heat had just been there. He refused to sleep in the truck that night, spending the remaining hours in the well-lit rest stop building. When dawn came, Michael inspected the sleeper berth in daylight. On the ceiling directly above where his head had been, he found scratches, fresh scratches, 4 parallel lines gouged into the upholstery, as if something with claws had been hanging there, watching him sleep, waiting for the right moment to drop down. Michael continued his delivery but had the entire truck professionally cleaned and inspected in Albuquerque. The mechanics found nothing wrong, but one older mechanic pulled him aside and asked where he'd parked the night before. When Michael told him, the mechanic nodded knowingly. That rest stop has a reputation. 3 drivers I know personally have reported the same thing. Something gets into sleeper cabs there. Some say it's the ghost of a lot lizard who was murdered there in the 90s. Michael researched the location and found scattered reports on trucker forums. Drivers describing the same experience, waking to pressure on their chest, invisible weight, the smell of decay, breathing in the darkness. Some reported scratches appearing on their bodies, marks they didn't have when they went to sleep. Others found their belongings moved or arranged in disturbing patterns while they slept. One driver claimed he'd set up a camera in his sleeper cab after his first encounter. The footage showed him sleeping normally, then suddenly thrashing as if fighting something off. But the camera captured nothing else. No figure, no entity, just a man fighting empty air, except the blankets moved on their own, pulled and twisted by invisible hands. And the temperature reading in the corner of the video dropped from 72 degrees to 48 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Michael installed his own camera system after that, angled to cover every inch of his sleeper cab. For months, nothing appeared on the recordings. Then, on a night when he was parked at a different rest stop in Oklahoma, he reviewed the footage from the previous night and saw something that made his blood freeze. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, the same time as his original encounter, a shadow appeared on his ceiling, not cast by anything, not following the rules of light and physics, just manifesting directly on the surface. The shadow was vaguely humanoid with elongated limbs and a head that seemed wrong, proportions that didn't match any living creature. The shadow moved across the ceiling, positioning itself directly above where Michael's head rested on the pillow. It hung there for 17 minutes, according to the timestamp. Michael had been asleep during this, unaware of the presence above him. The shadow then simply faded away, dissolving like smoke. When Michael checked the temperature data from his truck's climate control system, it showed the same dramatic drop from 70 degrees to 46 degrees during those exact 17 minutes. Michael now refuses to use his sleeper cab. He drives straight through on assignments no matter how long, or he pays for motels when rest is absolutely necessary. Other drivers have told him he's being paranoid, that he imagined the whole thing. But Michael has the footage, has the temperature data, has the scars on his chest that appeared after that night in Amarillo, 4 parallel scratches that healed into permanent marks. He's shared his experience on multiple trucker forums, and the responses have been disturbing. Dozens of drivers report similar encounters, always at 3:17 a.m., always involving weight on the chest, always accompanied by the smell of decay. The locations vary, but certain rest stops appear repeatedly in the accounts. Some drivers theorize it's a single entity that travels the highway system. Others believe there are multiple presences, territorial spirits that claim certain locations. Michael has developed a ritual now. When he must use a rest stop, he parks with his truck facing the exit, doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. He sleeps in the driver's seat, never in the sleeper cab, with all lights on. He keeps a recording device running and checks it every morning. Most nights show nothing, but occasionally he sees that shadow on the footage, appearing on various surfaces inside his truck, watching him, waiting. It hasn't touched him again since Amarillo, but Michael knows it could. Whatever it is, it's patient, and it's always hungry. Story 2. The Hitchhiker with No Shadow. Derek Morrison picked up a hitchhiker on Highway 50 in Nevada on June 3, 2018, despite every rule and instinct telling him not to. The man had been standing on the shoulder near the Utah border at 1:45 a.m., thumb out, wearing what looked like a business suit completely inappropriate for the desert location. Derek had driven past, then felt an overwhelming compulsion to turn around. He couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but something made him go back. The hitchhiker smiled as he climbed into the passenger seat. He introduced himself as Mr. Graves, no first name offered, and said he needed to reach Ely, about 60 miles west. His handshake was ice cold and his grip lingered a moment too long. Derek noticed immediately that something was wrong with the man's appearance. His features seemed slightly blurred, as if Derek was looking at him through imperfect glass. When Derek tried to focus directly on the man's face, details slipped away. Refusing to solidify into a clear image, Mr. Graves made polite conversation as they drove, asking about Derek's route, his family, his life. But the questions felt invasive somehow, too personal, too knowing. When Derek mentioned his daughter's name, Mr. Graves smiled and said, "Ashley, yes, she's 7 years old, likes horses." Derek had never mentioned any of those details. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. Derek demanded. Mr. Graves turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the dashboard, Derek saw that the man's eyes were completely black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils, but entirely black from edge to edge, like pools of ink had replaced his eyeballs. "I know lots of things, Derek. I know you're afraid right now. I know you want me out of your truck, but you won't stop. You can't stop." Derek tried to pull over, but his foot wouldn't move to the brake pedal. His hands stayed locked on the steering wheel, maintaining speed, keeping the truck moving forward. He was trapped in his own body, conscious and aware, but unable to control his actions. Mr. Graves chuckled, a sound like dead leaves scraping across pavement. "That's better. Just drive." For the next 30 miles, Mr. Graves spoke about Derek's life with impossible knowledge. He described Derek's childhood home in detail, recounted conversations Derek had never told anyone about, revealed secrets Derek had buried deep. But worse than the invasion of privacy was the tone. Mr. Graves spoke with ownership, as if Derek's life was a story he'd written, a possession he could examine at will. Derek managed to force words through his frozen throat. Mr. Graves tilted his head, the motion unnaturally smooth like a mannequin being posed. "I'm what happens when people stop believing in things like me. I'm the space between headlights and darkness. I'm the doubt that creeps in at 3 a.m. I'm old, Derek. Older than these highways, older than the vehicles that travel them. I used to have different forms, different methods." They passed under a bright overhead light at a construction zone, and Derek glanced at his passenger. Mr. Graves cast no shadow. The light flooded the cab, illuminating everything, and Derek's shadow was clearly visible on the dashboard and passenger door. But where Mr. Graves sat, there was nothing. No shadow, no reflection in the window, no evidence that anyone occupied that space except for the figure Derek could see directly. Derek's terror escalated as Mr. Graves continued speaking, his voice growing colder, more inhuman. He described the deaths of people Derek had never met, accidents that hadn't happened yet, tragedies waiting in the future. "Your friend Marcus, the one you're planning to visit next month, he won't make it that long. Heart attack while mowing his lawn, June 17th. Your mother's cancer will return in August." Derek screamed, tears streaming down his face. Mr. Graves went silent, and the temperature in the cab dropped so rapidly that Derek's breath fogged in front of him. Frost began forming on the inside of the windows, spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing in a language Derek didn't recognize. The entity that called itself Mr. Graves turned fully in its seat, and Derek saw that its smile had grown too wide, stretching across its face in a way that human flesh couldn't accommodate. "I stop when I choose to stop, Derek." Mr. Graves reached out and placed his freezing hand on Derek's arm. The cold burned through his shirt, and Derek felt something worse than temperature. It felt like his life was being drained, pulled out through the point of contact, years of existence flowing from him into the creature beside him. His vision began to gray at the edges, his heart slowing, his thoughts becoming sluggish and distant. The Ely city limits sign appeared in the headlights. Mr. Graves removed his hand, and Derek gasped as sensation returned to his body. The entity opened the passenger door while the truck was still moving at 60 miles per hour. "Thank you for the ride, Derek, and for the meal. I'll see you again, maybe next year, maybe next week." Mr. Graves stepped out of the moving truck and simply vanished. He didn't fall, didn't tumble, didn't get run over. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, like he'd been erased from reality. Derek regained control of his body and pulled over, shaking violently. He checked the passenger seat and found it covered in frost. The seatbelt was frozen solid, and where Mr. Graves had been sitting, the upholstery was withered and cracked, aged decades in the span of an hour. Derek looked at his own arm where the entity had touched him, and the skin there had turned gray, lifeless. Over the following weeks, that patch of skin never recovered, remaining cold and numb, a permanent reminder. He reported the incident to the police, who found nothing. No surveillance footage showed anyone entering or exiting his truck. The frost inside the cab was documented, as was the damaged upholstery and Derek's injured arm, but no explanation was offered. Medical examinations of the gray skin on Derek's arm showed tissue death consistent with severe frostbite, but the surrounding areas were completely healthy. Doctors couldn't explain how such localized damage had occurred. Derek researched Highway 50, called the loneliest road in America, and discovered a history of disappearances and strange encounters. Multiple drivers had reported picking up hitchhikers who vanished from moving vehicles, who knew impossible things, who left behind frozen seats and aged upholstery. One account from 1987 described an entity that called itself Mr. Another from 2003 mentioned Mr. The names changed, but the description remained consistent. A man in unsuitable clothing, black eyes, no shadow, freezing touch. Derek drives exclusively during daylight hours now, and he never, under any circumstances, picks up hitchhikers. He's installed multiple cameras in his cab, recording constantly, hoping that if the entity returns, he'll have proof. But he also fears what the footage might show. Fears seeing that figure appear in his passenger seat without warning, summoned by attention or thought or some schedule only it understands. The predictions Mr. Graves made have been horrifically accurate. Marcus died of a heart attack on June 17th while mowing his lawn, exactly as foretold. Derek's mother's cancer did return in August. Derek tried to warn them, tried to prevent the outcomes, but fate or the entity's power ensured events unfolded precisely as described. Derek lives now with the knowledge that something inhuman touched his life, marked him, and took something from him that can never be recovered. Derek doesn't know when, he just knows it's waiting. Story 3. The Rest Stop That Devours. Cassandra Wells had been driving professionally for 18 years when she pulled into a rest stop on Interstate 40 in Arkansas on November 12, 2020 at 4:23 a.m. She needed a bathroom break and a quick walk to fight off the drowsiness that came with overnight driving. The rest stop was nearly empty, just 2 other trucks parked in the shadows and a single car near the facilities building. The parking lot lights were functioning normally, bright sodium vapor lamps casting everything in harsh orange light. But Cassandra noticed immediately that the shadows were wrong. They fell in directions that didn't match the light sources, stretching toward the facilities building regardless of where the lamps were positioned. Every shadow, from vehicles, from trash cans, from the information sign, all pointed like arrows toward the entrance. Cassandra grabbed her flashlight and headed for the bathroom, unease prickling at her neck. The facilities building was standard construction, brick and concrete, nothing obviously wrong. But as she approached, she realized the entrance was darker than it should be. The lights inside were on. She could see them through the windows. But the doorway itself seemed to swallow light, a rectangle of absolute darkness that her eyes couldn't penetrate. She paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But her bladder insisted, and she told herself she was being ridiculous. Cassandra stepped through the doorway and immediately knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The darkness was physical, pressing against her skin like oil, coating her, seeping into her clothes. She fumbled for the light switch, but the lights that had been visible from outside cast no illumination inside. They glowed uselessly, providing no actual light, just points of luminescence in the consuming dark. Cassandra switched on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but only for about 3 feet before being absorbed completely. She could see that much of the hallway ahead of her. Institutional tile and painted cinder blocks. But beyond that radius might as well have been the void of space. She heard movement in the darkness ahead, not footsteps exactly, but something heavy dragging across the floor. She turned to leave and found the doorway gone. Where she'd entered just seconds before, there was only solid wall. Cassandra ran her hands across it, finding real brick, real mortar, cool and solid under her fingers. The exit had vanished. She was trapped in this corridor of darkness with something that moved, just beyond the reach of her flashlight. The dragging sound grew closer, accompanied now by breathing. Wet, labored breathing that rattled with fluid. Cassandra backed against the wall and swept her flashlight in the direction of the sound. For just a moment, the beam caught something. Not a clear image, but an impression of mass, of something large and wrong, with too many limbs arranged in configurations that made her eyes hurt. Then it moved beyond her light, circling her in the darkness. Cassandra screamed for help, but her voice died immediately, swallowed by the darkness just like the light. No echo, no sound traveling beyond a few feet. She was isolated completely, cut off from the outside world, despite being steps away from where she'd entered. Time became meaningless. She might have been in that corridor for minutes or hours, unable to tell. Her phone useless, its screen providing no light at all despite being on. The entity in the darkness spoke, but not with sound. Words appeared directly in her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. You entered. You fed yourself to me. All who pass through that door are consumed, not your body. Your body can leave, but pieces of you stay. Cassandra felt something touch her back, something that felt like fingers made of ice and cobwebs. Where it touched, she felt parts of herself being pulled away, not flesh, but something deeper, essential components of her identity. She tried to run, but direction had no meaning in the absolute darkness. Her flashlight beam showed the same 3 feet of hallway no matter which way she turned, as if she was running in place, never moving, trapped in a pocket of space that existed outside normal geography. The entity kept taking from her, its frozen fingers pulling away memories, emotions, experiences. She felt them going like photographs burning, there one moment and gone the next. Her daughter's birth, her wedding day, her father's funeral, each one ripped away, consumed by the presence in the darkness. Cassandra collapsed, unable to fight anymore, unable to even remember why she was fighting. The entity had taken so much that her sense of self was fragmenting, identity dissolving into the darkness that surrounded her. She was becoming empty, a shell that breathed and thought but contained nothing worth preserving. Then lights flooded the corridor, real lights, bright and painful after the extended darkness. A state trooper was shaking her shoulder, asking if she was all right. Cassandra was lying on the floor of the rest stop bathroom, completely normal bathroom. Harsh fluorescent lights, industrial fixtures, no darkness, no entity. The officer explained that another driver had reported seeing a woman enter the facilities over an hour ago and not come out. Cassandra stumbled outside, assisted by the trooper, and found her truck exactly where she'd left it. But when she checked her phone, 5 hours had passed. 5 hours in what had felt like perhaps 30 minutes. The sun was rising, morning light breaking over the Arkansas hills. The trooper asked if she needed medical attention, but Cassandra just wanted to leave to get as far from this rest stop as possible. She drove away, but over the following days, Cassandra realized the entity had kept its word. Pieces of her were missing, Not memories exactly, but the emotional weight of them. She remembered her daughter's birth as a fact, could recite details, but couldn't feel the joy associated with it. Her wedding day was just information now, devoid of the love and happiness that should accompany those memories. Her father's funeral happened. She knew it happened, but she couldn't access the grief. Cassandra became functional but hollow, capable of performing her job, interacting with people, living her life, but something essential was gone. Her family noticed the change. Her husband said it was like living with a perfect copy of his wife, someone who knew all the right things to say but didn't feel them anymore. Her daughter asked why Mommy didn't smile with her eyes anymore. She returned to that rest stop 6 months later, determined to confront the entity, to demand back what had been taken. But the rest stop was closed, condemned by the state, chain link fence surrounding it, signs warning of structural damage. Cassandra broke in anyway and found the facility's building demolished, reduced to rubble. Yet when she stood where the entrance had been, she felt cold fingers touching her back again, felt more pieces being pulled away, the entity still there somehow, still feeding despite the destruction of its physical location. Cassandra drives different routes now, avoiding Interstate 40 through Arkansas entirely. She's documented her experience extensively, posting warnings on trucker forums, trying to save others from the same fate. Some drivers have responded, claiming they experienced similar encounters at various rest stops across the country. They describe darkness that swallows light, entities that take pieces of identity, exits that vanish. One driver wrote that there are places along the highway system that exist partially in our world and partially somewhere else. Thin spots where things can reach through and feed on travelers. Cassandra believes him. She feels the empty spaces inside herself where memories used to have weight, where emotions used to live. She's learned to fake the responses people expect, to mimic the feelings she no longer has. But at night, when she's alone in her truck, she mourns the parts of herself that were devoured in that impossible darkness, consumed by an entity that still whispers in her mind sometimes, reminding her that it kept some pieces, that it owns part of her now, and that ownership is permanent. Story 4: The Convoy from Hell. Vincent Harper encountered the convoy on Interstate 80 through Wyoming on February 28, 2017, during a late winter storm that had reduced visibility to nearly zero. Vincent had 25 years of experience driving through every kind of weather, and he knew this stretch of highway intimately. The snow was coming down in thick sheets, his wipers barely keeping up, but he maintained a steady 45 miles per hour, confident in his abilities. Around 10:37 p.m., headlights appeared behind him, multiple sets approaching fast despite the dangerous conditions. Vincent checked his mirrors and counted 6 trucks running in tight formation, closer together than was safe in clear weather, suicidal in a blizzard. They closed the distance rapidly, and as they drew near, Vincent saw they were identical. 6 black Peterbilt trucks, no company markings, no identifying information, running lights configured in patterns he'd never seen before. The convoy pulled alongside him. 3 trucks on his left, 3 on his right, boxing him in perfectly. They matched his speed exactly, maintaining their formation with impossible precision given the road conditions. Vincent couldn't see the drivers clearly through the snow and the dark-tinted windows, just vague shapes behind the wheels. He grabbed his CB radio to ask what they were doing, but before he could speak, all 6 trucks honked their horns in unison. The sound wasn't normal. Horn blasts should be sharp and loud, but these were distorted, wrong, like they were coming through water or from very far away despite the trucks being right beside him. The horns blared again, and this time Vincent felt the sound in his bones vibrating through his seat, through the steering wheel, through his skull. It wasn't just noise, it was some kind of pressure that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. Vincent tried to slow down, to let the convoy pass, but his truck wouldn't respond. The accelerator pedal was pressed where his foot held it, but the truck maintained speed as if locked in cruise control, even though he'd never activated it. He tried to brake, but his leg wouldn't move. He was paralyzed from the waist down, able to steer but unable to control his speed, trapped in formation with these 6 identical trucks. The convoy began leading him off his intended route. When an exit appeared, all 6 trucks took it in perfect synchronization, and Vincent's truck followed despite his attempts to stay on the interstate. His steering wheel turned on its own, his hands just passengers along for the ride, unable to override whatever force was controlling his vehicle. They traveled down the exit ramp onto a smaller highway, then onto progressively narrower roads, the snow falling harder until they were on what appeared to be an unmarked service road leading into absolute wilderness. Vincent's panic reached new heights as he realized he was being taken somewhere isolated, somewhere no one would find him. The 6 trucks maintained their box formation, preventing any escape even if he regained control. Through the falling snow, he caught glimpses of the drivers now, and his blood ran cold. They were identical, not similar, identical. 6 drivers with the exact same face, the exact same posture, the exact same turn of the head. They moved in perfect unison, as if operated by a single consciousness controlling 6 bodies. The convoy suddenly stopped, all 7 trucks, including Vincent's, coming to a halt simultaneously. The engines shut off in unison, plunging the area into silence, broken only by the whisper of falling snow. Vincent tried his door, but it wouldn't open. He tried his windows, but they wouldn't roll down. He was locked in, trapped in his own truck in the middle of nowhere with 6 identical vehicles surrounding him. The drivers exited their trucks, moving with disturbing synchronization. All 6 were the same. Tall, gaunt men in black jackets with faces that looked wrong even at a distance, features slightly off in ways Vincent couldn't quite identify. They approached his truck, surrounding it, and placed their hands against the metal. Where they touched, frost spread rapidly, intricate patterns forming, ice that glowed faintly with its own light. Vincent felt the temperature in his cab dropping despite the heater running at full blast. His breath fogged in front of him, and ice began forming on the inside of his windows, spreading from where the entities outside touched the exterior. The frost patterns on the inside mirror those on the outside perfectly, as if the barriers between interior and exterior had become meaningless. One of the entities pressed its face against the driver's side window, and Vincent got a clear look at its features. It had human characteristics arranged in almost the right way, but the proportions were wrong. Eyes too far apart, nose too flat, mouth too wide. It smiled, and Vincent saw too many teeth, small and pointed like a shark's, filling a mouth that opened wider than human jaws should allow. The entity spoke, its voice somehow reaching Vincent despite the closed windows. "We've been waiting for you, Vincent. You're the one. We've collected others, but you're special." Vincent had no idea what it meant, couldn't comprehend what further entailed, but the way it said the words made his flesh crawl. All 6 entities began chanting in unison, words in a language that hurt to hear, syllables that seemed to twist in the air, visible like smoke despite the darkness. The frost covering Vincent's truck began to glow brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the chant. Vincent felt something pulling at him. Not physically, but deeper, pulling at his essence, trying to drag him out of his body. He fought against it, clutching the steering wheel, focusing on his own identity, his own existence. The entities chanted louder, their voices rising to a shriek that shattered his passenger window. Despite the cold, strengthened glass, snow and darkness poured in through the broken window, and with them came hands. Those impossibly jointed hands reaching for him. Fingers that bent in too many places, skin that felt like frozen leather. Vincent screamed and lashed out, his paralysis suddenly broken. He started his truck, the engine turning over despite having been off without his input. The headlights blazed to life, and in their illumination, Vincent saw the 6 entities recoil. They weren't afraid of the light exactly, but something about it disrupted their coordination. For just a moment, they moved independently rather than in unison. And in that moment, their formation broke. Vincent slammed the accelerator, his truck lurching forward. He crashed through the gap where one entity had stumbled, his bumper passing through it like it was made of smoke. His truck bounced over rough terrain, off the service road, through snow-covered brush, heading for what he hoped was back towards civilization. Behind him, the 6 black trucks started up simultaneously, their headlights cutting through the storm, beginning their pursuit. For 37 miles, Vincent drove through terrain that should have been impassable, his truck somehow finding traction where there should have been none, staying ahead of the convoy that pursued him with impossible speed. He burst onto a highway without knowing how he got there, the landscape suddenly changing from wilderness to clear road. The moment his tires hit pavement, the 6 black trucks vanished from his mirrors. One moment they were there, 100 yards back and closing. The next they were gone like they'd never existed. Vincent drove straight to the nearest truck stop and called the police. He reported everything, knowing how insane it would sound. Officers took his statement and investigated. They found his truck's GPS data corrupted, showing impossible locations, coordinates that placed him in areas where no roads existed. The broken passenger window was documented, but the glass fragments didn't match any known manufacturing standards. Chemical analysis showed crystalline structures that shouldn't form in normal glass. The 6 black Peterbilt trucks were never found. Vincent filed an insurance claim for the window, which was paid without question, but the adjuster pulled him aside and said, "You're the 4th driver this year to report an encounter with identical black trucks on Wyoming back roads. The companies flagged it." Vincent researched other incidents and found scattered reports going back decades. Convoys of identical vehicles, drivers who looked the same, people being led into wilderness areas and sometimes never returning. Vincent quit long-haul trucking after that. He drives local routes now, never more than 50 miles from his home. Never at night, never in winter conditions. He's been contacted by other drivers who've encountered similar convoys, each describing the same synchronized movements, the same impossible coordination, the same feeling of being selected for something. They've formed an informal network, sharing sightings, trying to map where and when these convoys appear. There's a pattern they've discovered. The convoys appear during storms, always on remote stretches of highway, always targeting solo drivers with years of experience. Vincent believes the entities are collecting something from the drivers, some quality or essence that only experienced truckers possess. He was lucky to escape. Others weren't. The missing persons reports in trucking communities show dozens of experienced drivers who vanished on remote highways during storms. Their trucks sometimes found abandoned, sometimes never found at all. Vincent keeps his broken window glass in a safe deposit box, the only physical evidence of his encounter. Sometimes he takes it out and examines the impossible crystalline structures, wondering what those entities wanted, where they were trying to take him, and what further meant in their context. He's glad he'll never find out, but the not knowing haunts him. Every snowflake that falls reminds him of that night, of those synchronized movements, of hands with too many joints reaching through his shattered window, trying to pull him into a darkness from which there would be no return. Story 5. The Voice on Channel 13. Gregory Nelson was hauling lumber from Oregon to Nevada on September 19, 2021, when his CB radio started picking up a voice on Channel 13. Gregory had been driving professionally for 14 years, and he knew Channel 13 was rarely used. considered unlucky by most truckers who preferred the standard Channel 19. Gregory was driving a blue Freightliner. He glanced at his mirrors looking for another truck that might be broadcasting to him, but Highway 95 was empty, just his truck alone on a long stretch of Nevada desert. He picked up his CB handset. The voice responded immediately. "I'm talking to you, Gregory." Gregory's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The voice knew his name, knew his truck color, knew his specific vehicle. He hadn't identified himself, hadn't mentioned any details. He demanded. The voice on Channel 13 laughed, a sound that was almost normal, almost human, but with an undertone that suggested something else entirely. "I know everything about you, Gregory. I know about the accident in 2015. I know about the pills you take that aren't prescribed. I know about the money you borrowed from your brother and never paid back. But that's not important right now." Gregory checked his GPS. Mile marker 143 was 36 miles ahead. The voice's timing was eerily accurate. Gregory asked despite himself, despite knowing he shouldn't engage with this. The voice on Channel 13 went quiet for a moment, then, "Your death, Gregory, if you don't listen to me." Gregory considered turning off his CB radio, but curiosity and fear kept him listening. The voice continued. "There's a car at mile marker 143 parked on the shoulder, hazards flashing. You'll think about stopping to help. If you stop, you'll die. The people in that car are not people anymore. They've been waiting for someone like you, someone alone, someone who still believes in helping others. Don't stop, Gregory. Drive past." "This is insane," Gregory muttered, but he was sweating. The voice on Channel 13 had an absolute quality to it, a certainty that was more terrifying than any obvious threat. "I'm trying to save your life," the voice said. "I failed with the others. 7 drivers in the past 3 months have stopped at mile marker 143 to help that car. None of them were ever seen again. Their trucks were found abandoned, drivers missing, no signs of struggle, no evidence." Gregory verified this later and found it was true. 7 truckers had vanished on Highway 95 in Nevada between June and September 2021. All last spotted near the same stretch of highway. Gregory wanted to dismiss the voice as a prank, but the specific knowledge, the timing, the accuracy of details made that explanation feel insufficient. Gregory asked. The voice on Channel 13 sighed. A sound like wind through dead trees. "I was driver number 4. I stopped to help. They took me, Gregory. They took me somewhere that isn't quite real, isn't quite anywhere. I'm still there, in a way, stuck. But I learned to broadcast, learned to reach out, to warn people. You're the first one who's listened this long." The others turned off their radios or thought I was joking. They stopped at mile marker 143. Gregory saw the mile marker approaching. 140, then 141, then 142. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty highway. Then he saw it. Mile marker 143, and on the shoulder, exactly as predicted, a car with its hazards flashing. Not a modern car, something older, maybe from the 1980s, in too good condition for its age. 3 figures stood beside it, waving frantically for help. Every instinct told Gregory to stop. Someone clearly needed assistance, but the voice on Channel 13 was screaming now, "Don't stop! Don't look at them! Drive, Gregory!" Gregory saw the figures clearly as he approached. They were wrong, even at a distance, even in poor light. Something about their proportions wasn't right. They moved oddly, gestures that didn't quite match human biomechanics. Gregory accelerated past them, fighting against his own conscience, against years of being the kind of person who helped others. As he passed, the 3 figures turned to watch him go, and their heads rotated further than human necks should allow, tracking him with unnatural precision. Their faces were blank, no features at all, just smooth surfaces where eyes and mouths should have been. In his mirrors, Gregory watched the scene recede behind him. The three figures stood motionless now, no longer waving, just staring after him with their featureless faces. Then they moved, all three simultaneously turning toward the highway, beginning to walk into the road, not to cross it, but to follow it, to follow him, walking at a pace that should have been too slow to keep up with a vehicle traveling 60 miles per hour. But they were keeping up. Gregory watched his mirrors in growing horror as the three figures maintained their distance behind him, walking impossibly fast, covering ground no human should be able to traverse on foot. They stayed exactly 1/4 mile back, matching his speed perfectly, never falling behind, never gaining. The voice on Channel 13 returned. "They know you saw them now. They know you didn't stop. They're angry. I'm sorry, Gregory. I didn't think they'd chase you." Gregory screamed into his CB handset. "What do I do?" The voice responded after a pause. "You need to reach mile marker 200. There's a truck stop there. Get inside the building with other people. They can't take you if you're surrounded by witnesses." Gregory pushed his truck to 70 miles per hour, then 80. But the three figures maintained their pace behind him, still walking, still keeping exactly 1/4 mile distance. Their speed was inhuman, impossible. Yet they moved with the same steady gait, arms swinging, legs stepping, just walking at 80 miles per hour down the center of a Nevada highway. For 57 miles, Gregory drove in absolute terror, watching his mirrors, watching the figures who pursued him with patient, relentless determination. Other vehicles passed, going the opposite direction. But no one else was traveling his direction. No one else to witness what was chasing him. The voice on Channel 13 provided constant updates. "You're doing good, Gregory. 43 miles to the truck stop. Stay ahead of them." At mile marker 197, Gregory's truck began having engine trouble. Not mechanical failure, but something else. His dashboard lights flickered. His speedometer needle swung wildly. His engine revved and stuttered without his input. The voice on Channel 13 went frantic. "They're interfering. They're trying to slow you down. Fight it, Gregory." Gregory wrestled with his controls, forcing the truck to maintain speed even as its systems seemed to rebel against him. Mile marker 200 appeared, and Gregory had never been so relieved to see a truck stop in his life. He pulled in at dangerous speed, barely controlling his truck as he parked. He jumped out and ran for the building, not looking back, terrified of what he'd see if he did. Inside, the fluorescent-lit space was normal, safe, populated by 3 other drivers and a clerk who looked at Gregory's panicked expression with concern. Gregory looked through the windows toward his truck. The 3 figures were standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. Featureless faces turned toward the building. They stood there for 17 minutes, motionless, waiting. Then they simply turned and walked back toward the highway, their gait returning to normal human pace now that their pursuit had failed. Gregory stayed at the truck stop until sunrise, too terrified to leave in darkness. The voice on Channel 13 spoke to him once more as dawn broke. "You made it. You're safe now. They only hunt at night. But Gregory, they'll remember you. Every time you drive this highway after dark, they'll be waiting. Find a different route." Then the voice was gone, replaced by normal CB chatter. Gregory reported the incident to the Nevada State Police, who investigated and found nothing. The car at mile marker 143 was gone. No evidence it had ever been there. No surveillance footage captured the 3 figures walking at highway speed for 57 miles. No other witnesses corroborated his account. The 7 missing drivers remained missing, their cases unsolved. Gregory researched the CB radio phenomenon and found similar reports scattered across the country. Drivers receiving warnings on Channel 13 from voices claiming to be previous victims, warnings about specific locations, specific mile markers, specific threats. Some drivers heeded the warnings and survived to report their experiences. Others ignored them and were never heard from again. Gregory changed routes permanently, adding 4 hours to his regular run to avoid Highway 95 through Nevada. He monitors Channel 13 obsessively now, listening for warnings for other voices trying to save lives from beyond some threshold they can't return from. He's heard the voice that saved him twice more, warning other drivers about different locations, different threats. Once, Gregory broadcasted his own warning when he saw a suspicious vehicle on Highway 50, trying to pay forward the salvation he'd received. He doesn't know if it worked, doesn't know if other drivers believed him any more than he initially believed the voice that saved his life. But he tries broadcasting warnings when something seems wrong, when intuition tells him danger is waiting. And every night he parks in well-lit, populated areas, never alone, never isolated, because he remembers those 3 featureless faces watching him from beyond the lights. Remembers their impossible speed, their patient pursuit. He knows they're still out there, waiting at mile marker 143, waving for help, ready to take whoever stops into whatever nowhere claimed driver number 4 and the 6 who followed. Story 6. The Cargo That Screamed. Jennifer Huang accepted a high-priority delivery job on March 4, 2019, hauling a sealed shipping container from Los Angeles to Chicago. The manifest listed the cargo as medical specimens, and the paperwork included special handling instructions. Maintain specific temperature, no delays, no inspection of container contents under any circumstances. Jennifer had 16 years of professional driving experience, and she'd hauled sensitive cargo before. The pay was exceptional, triple her normal rate, which should have been her first warning. The container was loaded onto her flatbed by a crew who worked in absolute silence, wearing full hazmat suits despite the manifest's claim of routine medical specimens. Jennifer watched them seal the container with multiple locks and electronic security systems, then place warning labels that seemed excessive. Biohazard Level 4. Authorized personnel only. Do not open under any circumstances. She signed the paperwork and started her route. The screaming started somewhere outside Flagstaff, Arizona around 11:47 p.m. At first, Jennifer thought it was the wind whistling through her trailer, a common occurrence at highway speeds. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, and horrifyingly organic. Someone or something inside the sealed container was screaming. Not random noise, not mechanical sound, but actual screams of agony or terror or both. Jennifer pulled over immediately, her hands shaking. She called the dispatcher, explained what she was hearing. The dispatcher's response was cold and scripted. Continue to Chicago. Do not open the container. Do not stop except for fuel. The cargo is secure. Jennifer demanded an explanation. The dispatcher simply repeated, Continue to Chicago. The sounds are expected. Jennifer stood beside her truck, listening to the screams emanating from the sealed container. They were definitely human, or something that had been human. Multiple voices overlapping, crying for help in languages she couldn't identify. The container was supposed to be airtight, soundproof according to the specifications, yet the screaming was clearly audible from 20 feet away. She considered calling the police, but the paperwork she'd signed included federal authorization codes, Department of Defense clearances, liability waivers that threatened prosecution if she disclosed information about the shipment. Jennifer was trapped between her conscience and her legal obligations. The screams continued, rising and falling, sometimes fading to whimpers, then surging back to full-throated shrieks. Jennifer made the decision to continue driving, telling herself that if the cargo was legitimately authorized, there must be a reasonable explanation. But as the miles passed, the screaming evolved. It became synchronized, all voices screaming in unison, forming patterns that sounded almost like words. Not English, not any language Jennifer recognized, but structured communication. Whatever was in the container was trying to tell her something. Near Albuquerque, the screaming stopped abruptly. Jennifer felt relief for about 30 seconds before a new sound started. Scratching, metal on metal, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from inside the container. Something was scraping against the interior walls, not randomly, but with purpose. Jennifer counted the scratches, 17 in quick succession, then silence, then 17 more, repeating endlessly. The number 17 meant nothing to her, but the consistency was terrifying. She stopped for fuel in Amarillo and approached the container while the pump ran. Up close, she could see the metal bulging slightly in places, as if massive pressure was being applied from inside. The temperature control unit showed the container maintaining the specified 38 degrees Fahrenheit, yet heat radiated from the metal surface. Jennifer touched it briefly and jerked her hand back. The container was hot enough to cause pain, despite the refrigeration system running at full capacity. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a voice came from inside the container, muffled but comprehensible. "Please, let us out. We've been here so long, so hungry." The voice was male, exhausted, desperate. Jennifer backed away, horror flooding through her. The paperwork said medical specimens, not people. She called the dispatcher again, demanded to know what she was really transporting. The dispatcher's response was different this time. Urgent rather than scripted. "Ms. Huang, listen carefully. The entities in that container are not human anymore, regardless of what they sound like. They are extremely dangerous. You must not open the container under any circumstances." He gave her a number she was supposed to memorize. "Your truck and cargo will be considered a loss." Jennifer drove away from the fuel station, her mind reeling. Entities, he'd called them. Not people, not specimens, entities. What had she agreed to transport? The voice from inside the container continued. "Jennifer, we know your name. We can smell you. We can hear your heartbeat. Let us out, Jennifer. We're so hungry. You smell delicious." The voice changed, becoming something else, losing its human quality. It deepened and split into multiple tones, speaking simultaneously, harmonizing in ways that shouldn't be possible with a single vocal tract. The voice recited her life story, impossibly detailed information, facts she'd never told anyone. Jennifer screamed for it to stop, but the voice continued, speaking her secrets, her fears, her memories. It knew things no one could know, private thoughts she'd never voiced. Moments from her childhood she'd forgotten herself. Whatever was in the container had access to her mind somehow, reading her like an open book, demonstrating its power, its hunger to know her completely. Near Oklahoma City, the container began shaking. Jennifer felt her entire trailer rocking, the suspension groaning under sudden shifts in weight. Whatever was inside was throwing itself against the walls, trying to breach the seals. The electronic security system on the container started beeping, warning lights flashing red. One of the seals was failing. Jennifer pushed her truck to 80 miles per hour, desperate to reach Chicago before the container opened. The voice inside was laughing now. Multiple voices joined in terrible harmony, celebrating the weakening seal. "We're coming out, Jennifer. We're almost free. And you're the first meal we'll have in so very long. Your flesh, your blood, your bones, your soul." The seal failed somewhere in Illinois, 3 hours from Chicago. Jennifer heard it break, a sharp crack followed by the hiss of escaping pressure. The voice went silent. The shaking stopped. For a terrible moment, everything was quiet. Then Jennifer's trailer lurched as something massive moved inside the container. The doors hadn't opened, but something was free from whatever restraints had held it, loose inside the sealed space, testing its strength. Jennifer called the emergency number the dispatcher had given her. A calm voice answered. "Seal breach confirmed. Your truck's GPS has been tracked. Continue to Chicago. The voice gave her coordinates to an industrial area. Do not stop. Do not investigate. When you arrive, disconnect your tractor and drive away. Jennifer drove through the worst 3 hours of her life, feeling her trailer move with the entity's movements, hearing it speak to her through the partially breached seal. It described what it would do to her in detail that was imaginative and horrifying. It promised her death would take days, that it would savor every moment, that her screams would be beautiful. She reached the coordinates at 4:37 a.m. The location was an abandoned warehouse complex, but dozens of military vehicles surrounded it, soldiers in full containment gear establishing a perimeter. Jennifer disconnected her trailer as instructed and drove away, hands shaking so badly she could barely control her truck. In her mirrors, she watched soldiers approach her trailer with flamethrowers and heavy weapons. She never learned what happened next, what was in the container, or whether they contained it. She was debriefed by federal agents who confiscated her logbooks, her GPS data, her phone, everything. They made her sign documents that threatened life imprisonment if she disclosed any details of the shipment. They paid her the promised fee plus a substantial bonus for completing the delivery despite the seal breach. Jennifer quit trucking immediately. She couldn't handle the thought of hauling cargo without knowing what was really inside. Couldn't trust that manifests told the truth. She wakes up screaming sometimes, hearing that voice reciting her life story, hearing those things laughing as the seal failed, hearing their promises of consumption. She researches disappearances of truckers who hauled sensitive cargo, and the numbers are disturbing. Dozens of drivers have vanished while transporting sealed containers for federal agencies. Their trucks found abandoned, trailers empty, no explanation provided. Jennifer believes she knows what happened to them. The seals failed too far from secure locations. The entities inside escaped and fed. And somewhere, someone is still loading these containers, still hiring drivers to transport them, still paying exceptional rates to people who don't ask questions. Jennifer asks questions now. She asks everyone, and she never stops checking shadows, never stops listening for voices that know too much, never stops looking for things that hunger for human flesh and souls and screams. Story 7. The truck stop at the end. Marcus Blackwood stopped at a Flying J truck stop outside Elko, Nevada, on August 8, 2018, after 16 hours of driving from Seattle. He needed fuel, food, and sleep in that order. Marcus had been a professional driver for 12 years, and this Flying J was a regular stop on his route. He knew the layout, knew the staff, knew which parking spots had the best angle to avoid morning sun. It was familiar, safe, routine. Except this time it was different. Marcus noticed immediately that the other trucks parked in the lot were all facing the same direction, backed into their space rather than pulled forward, every single vehicle oriented identically. That wasn't normal. Drivers parked, however, was convenient. The uniformity was unsettling, like someone had arranged them deliberately. Marcus fueled his truck and went inside. The facility was nearly empty despite the full parking lot outside. One clerk stood behind the counter, a middle-aged woman Marcus had never seen before. She smiled at him with too many teeth, her grin stretching wider than comfortable. "Welcome to the Flying J," "This is your last stop, Marcus?" Marcus asked. The clerk's smile didn't change. "Exactly what it sounds like. This is where your journey ends. Everyone outside has already accepted it." Marcus looked through the windows at the parking lot. The other trucks were still there, but he couldn't see any drivers. No one walking between vehicles, no one entering or exiting the building, just empty trucks arranged in perfect rows. Marcus decided to leave immediately. Something was profoundly wrong, but when he exited the building and approached his truck, he found the parking lot had changed. More trucks had appeared, dozens of them, all facing the same direction, filling every available space. And they were older now, vintage trucks from the 70s, 80s, 90s, models that shouldn't still be in service, all in various states of decay. He reached his truck and found the driver's door locked, despite his certainty that he'd left it open. His keys were gone from his pocket. Marcus checked every pocket, his bags, everywhere. The keys had simply vanished. He was stranded in a truck stop that was becoming increasingly wrong with every moment that passed. A man approached from between two trucks, walking with a shambling gait. His clothes were decades out of style, and his skin had a gray pallor that suggested death rather than illness. "You can't leave," the man said, his voice hollow. "None of us can leave. We thought we were just stopping for fuel, for rest. But this place, it doesn't let go. We're all here forever, Marcus. All the drivers who've stopped here. Decades of us." Marcus backed away, looking around wildly. More figures were emerging from between trucks, dozens of them. All with that same gray skin, all moving with that shambling walk. They converged on him slowly, deliberately, surrounding him. One woman in a 1980s-style uniform said, "I stopped here in 1987, 31 years ago. I remember my family, I remember my life. But I can't leave. None of us can." Marcus ran, pushing through the crowd of gray-skinned drivers. They didn't try to stop him, just watched with sad, empty eyes. He ran for the highway, for the exit that would take him back to civilization. But the exit ramp kept receding, staying the same distance away no matter how fast he ran. The truck stop stretched around him, parking lot expanding, the building growing larger, encompassing everything. He stopped running, exhausted and terrified. The gray drivers had followed at their slow pace and now formed a circle around him. Marcus gasped. An older man wearing clothes from the 1970s stepped forward. "The truck stop is hungry. It's always hungry. It exists in between, a place that's here and not here, on the edge of your world and something else. It lures in drivers and feeds on their existence, draining them slowly until they become like us, empty shells." Marcus screamed, the sound echoing across the impossible expanse of the truck stop. He tried his cell phone, but it showed no signal, and when he tried to place a call anyway, his own voice answered. "You've reached Marcus Blackwood. I'm unable to take your call because I'm trapped at a Flying J truck stop in Nevada forever." Marcus threw the phone, watching it skitter across the pavement. Days passed, or what felt like days. Time had no meaning in this place. The sun never fully rose or set, stuck in perpetual twilight. Marcus tried every exit, every road leading away, but they all looped back to the truck stop. He tried to sleep, but sleep brought nightmares of being absorbed into the pavement, becoming part of the truck stop itself. His consciousness diffused across the entire structure, aware of every trapped driver, every vehicle, every moment of despair. The gray drivers explained the rules such as they understood them. The truck stop released someone occasionally, randomly, without pattern or reason. Once every few years, a driver would simply find themselves back on the highway, freed with no explanation. But most stayed forever, slowly fading, their trucks gradually aging and decaying around them until both driver and vehicle became indistinguishable from the environment. Marcus explored the facility, finding areas that shouldn't exist. Hallways extending for miles filled with doors leading to infinite variations of the same truck stop amenities. Some areas were decades old, others looked futuristic. He found a section that appeared to be from the 1950s, complete with drivers in period clothing. Still waiting, still trapped, some of them barely recognizable as human anymore, faded to the point of translucency. In the deepest section of the facility, Marcus found something that might have been the heart of the truck stop, a space that defied geometry, walls meeting at impossible angles, a room that was somehow larger inside than the entire building could contain from outside. In the center, a pulsing mass of darkness that radiated tumult and hunger, feeding on the trapped drivers, sustaining itself on their stolen existence. Marcus tried to destroy it, attacking the mass with tools he found, but his efforts had no effect. The darkness absorbed everything, drew in every attempt to harm it, fed on his rage and desperation. A voice came from the mass, ancient and inhuman. "You cannot end me. I am old, older than these highways, older than the vehicles that travel them. I have fed on lost travelers for millennia, adapting, changing, becoming what you see now." Marcus retreated, defeated. He joined the gray drivers in their endless waiting, sitting in the fluorescent-lit facility, watching the twilight outside, hoping for release that might never come. He lost track of time completely, days or weeks or months passing in a blur of sameness. Then, without warning or explanation, Marcus woke up in his truck on the shoulder of Interstate 80, 20 miles past Elko. His keys were in the ignition. His phone showed he'd been out of contact for 47 minutes, though his experience had felt like weeks. His truck's GPS showed a gap in its tracking, a period where his location couldn't be determined. Marcus drove straight to the nearest town and reported his experience to the police. They investigated the Flying J outside Elko and found it operating normally. No trapped drivers, no gray-skinned entities, no impossible geometry. But Marcus's description of the interior matched historical layouts of the facility from different decades, details he shouldn't have known, changes that had been made and then renovated away years before he started driving. He researched disappearances of truckers near Elko and found a disturbing pattern. Over the past 60 years, dozens of professional drivers had vanished on that stretch of I-80. Their trucks were usually found parked at rest stops or truck stops, sometimes with engines still running, drivers simply gone. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, just empty vehicles and missing people. Marcus believes he was one of the lucky ones, released for reasons he'll never understand. But he drives different routes now, avoiding Elko entirely, avoiding any location that feels too familiar, too comfortable. Because he knows the truth. There are places along America's highways that aren't quite real, that exist in between, that hunger for travelers. And once they catch you, they rarely let go. He still has nightmares about the gray drivers, about that pulsing darkness at the heart of the truck stop, about the voice that told him it was eternal. Sometimes he wakes up with that gray pallor to his skin fading after a few minutes, but there long enough to see in the mirror. He's terrified that his release wasn't permanent, that the truck stop still has a claim on him, that one day he'll fade completely and find himself back in that twilight parking lot, surrounded by decades of trapped drivers waiting for a freedom that never comes. Story 8. The thing that flagged him down. Robert Chen was driving Interstate 29 through South Dakota on December 15, 2019, hauling auto parts from Sioux Falls to Fargo. The winter night was brutally cold, temperature hovering around -15 degrees, and Robert's heated cab was the only warmth for miles. Around 1:23 a.m., Robert's headlights caught a figure on the shoulder, waving frantically for help. Robert had been driving professionally for 20 years, and he'd stopped to help stranded motorists more times than he could count. But something about this figure made him hesitate. The person was wearing summer clothes, no jacket, no hat, just a t-shirt and jeans in sub-zero temperatures. That was impossible. No one could survive dressed like that in this cold. But the figure kept waving, desperate, and Robert's conscience overrode his caution. He pulled onto the shoulder and grabbed his spotlight to get a better look. The figure approached his truck, and Robert saw it was a man probably in his 30s with no visible signs of hypothermia despite the inadequate clothing. His skin wasn't blue, wasn't showing frostbite, wasn't even showing goosebumps. The man knocked on Robert's passenger window. Robert cracked it slightly, unwilling to open it fully. The man nodded vigorously. "My car broke down. I'm freezing." His breath didn't fog in the frigid air. Robert's did, visible puffs of condensation with every word, but the man's breath was invisible despite claiming to be freezing. Robert asked, shining his spotlight down the highway. No vehicle was visible in either direction. No broken-down car on the shoulder. Nothing. The man gestured vaguely behind him. "Back there, just a mile or so." I walked looking for help, but he wasn't shivering. His body showed none of the involuntary responses to extreme cold that should be present. Robert's instincts screamed warnings, but the man looked desperate. "I'll call a tow truck for you," Robert offered. The man's expression changed, desperation replaced by something else, something cold and predatory. "I need to get in your truck, Robert." Robert hadn't told the man his name. His truck had no visible identifying information. The man smiled, and his teeth were wrong, too sharp, too numerous. "I know lots of things, Robert Chen. Age 43, hauling auto parts, route from Sioux Falls to Fargo, wife named Linda, 2 kids named Sarah and Michael, lives in Bismarck, afraid of heights, dreams about drowning. I know everything about you." Robert slammed the truck into gear and accelerated away, his heart hammering. In his mirror, he watched the figure standing on the shoulder, not moving, just watching him go. Then it began running after him, maintaining a pace that matched his truck, despite Robert pushing 50 miles per hour, then 60, then 70. The figure ran with inhuman speed, its legs moving in ways that violated biomechanics, eating up distance impossibly fast. Robert pushed his truck to 80 miles per hour, the maximum safe speed in these conditions. The figure was still behind him, running, closing the distance. Robert could see it clearly in his mirrors now. And it wasn't human anymore, not even pretending. Its limbs had elongated, arms and legs stretching as it ran, its face twisting into something angular and wrong. The summer clothes it wore were part of it. Not fabric, but skin that mimicked clothing. A camouflage to appear human from a distance. The creature pulled alongside his trailer, running in the lane next to him, keeping perfect pace at 80 miles per hour. It turned its head to look at Robert, and he saw its face clearly. A smooth surface with features that appeared and disappeared, cycling through different faces, different expressions. Trying to find one that would make him stop, would make him open his door. Robert grabbed his CB radio, screaming for help, broadcasting on every channel. His own words played back at him, the creature mimicking his voice perfectly, mocking his terror. The creature leaped onto his trailer, clinging to the side with hands that had too many fingers, each digit ending in claws that punctured metal. It climbed toward his cab with spider-like agility, moving across the exterior of his truck, while he drove 80 miles per hour through a South Dakota winter night. Robert swerved, trying to shake it off, but it held fast, pulling itself forward. Robert saw a rest area ahead and made a split-second decision. He accelerated even more, pushing his truck to its absolute limit, and aimed for the rest area's entrance. At the last moment, he hit his brakes hard, throwing his weight against the seatbelt as his truck decelerated violently. The creature lost its grip, tumbling forward, sailing through the air as momentum carried it past Robert's cab. It landed hard on the pavement, rolling, limbs at angles that should have broken bones. But it recovered immediately, rising to its feet, beginning to run toward Robert's now stationary truck. Robert saw lights in the rest area, other trucks, people, witnesses. He laid on his horn, blaring it continuously, trying to wake anyone who might be sleeping, trying to attract attention. Lights came on in other trucks. Drivers emerged to see what the commotion was about. The creature stopped 50 yards from Robert's truck and studied the situation. With multiple witnesses present, it couldn't continue its attack without being seen. It stood there evaluating, its form shifting and rippling, cycling through different appearances. A stranded motorist, a state trooper, a lost child, each illusion lasting seconds before being replaced by the next. Then it simply walked away, moving into the darkness beyond the rest area lights, dissolving into shadows until it was gone. Robert sat in his truck, shaking, surrounded by confused drivers asking what happened. He tried to explain, but his words sounded insane even to himself. A thing that looked human, that chased his truck at 80 miles per hour, that climbed onto his trailer, that knew everything about him. No one believed him. But in the morning, when daylight allowed inspection, Robert's trailer showed the damage. Deep gouges in the metal where something with claws had gripped it. Running the entire length of the trailer, parallel scratches that matched handprints with 6 fingers each. The other drivers saw the evidence, and their skepticism turned to unease. Something had climbed on Robert's truck, something with claws, something strong enough to puncture sheet metal. Robert filed a report with the South Dakota Highway Patrol, who documented the damage but offered no explanation. Similar incidents had been reported sporadically over the years, drivers claiming to be chased by things that looked human but weren't. Things that knew impossible details about their lives, things that ran at highway speeds. Most reports were dismissed as fatigue hallucinations, but the physical evidence on Robert's trailer couldn't be explained away. Robert researched these encounters and found a pattern. The creatures appeared in cold, isolated locations, always at night, always in the appearance of someone who needed help. They preyed on the kindness of drivers, on the instinct to assist someone in distress. But if the driver didn't stop, if they realized something was wrong and fled, the creatures revealed their true nature and pursued with terrifying determination. Robert still drives, but he never stops for stranded motorists anymore, not at night, not in isolated locations. He calls for help on their behalf, but doesn't engage directly. Other drivers have called him heartless for this policy, but Robert knows the truth. Some things on the highway wear human faces as camouflage, as hunting strategy, and the price of kindness can be far higher than anyone should have to pay. He checks his mirrors constantly now, watching for figures that run too fast, that don't breathe fog and cold air, that know his name without introduction. And he never, ever forgets the thing that flagged him down on that freezing December night, the thing that almost succeeded in getting into his truck, the thing that still hunts Interstate 29, waiting for the next driver who stops to help. Story 9. The dispatcher who wasn't there. Angela Torres received a call from her dispatcher at 3:47 a.m. on May 22, 2020, while hauling electronics from Dallas to Memphis on Interstate 30. Angela had worked for the same company for 11 years, and she knew her dispatcher's voice intimately. Steve Patterson had been coordinating her routes since she started, and they'd developed the easy rapport that comes from years of professional collaboration. "Angela, this is Steve." Angela was immediately suspicious. Steve never called in the middle of the night for route changes unless there was an emergency. Steve's voice came through clearly. "There's an accident ahead on I-30. Major pileup. Highway's going to be closed for hours." Angela checked her GPS. Exit 67 was 12 miles ahead. "Okay, but why didn't you text me?" There was a pause, then Steve's voice again. "Phone system is down. Had to call directly. Just trust me on this, Angela. Angela agreed and ended the call, but unease settled over her. Something about the conversation felt wrong, though she couldn't identify what specifically. She took exit 67 and followed County Road 19 as instructed. The road was narrow, barely 2 lanes cutting through dense forest with no lights, no houses, no signs of civilization. Angela's GPS showed the route Steve had described, but the estimated time didn't make sense. Following this detour should save her an hour if the highway was truly blocked, but the GPS showed it would add 3 hours to her journey. Angela tried calling Steve back to clarify. The number rang once, then his voice answered. "Angela, keep following County Road 19. Then the call disconnected. Angela tried again, but the number went straight to voicemail. Steve's usual greeting about being unavailable and leaving a message. She left a message asking him to call her back immediately. 20 minutes into the detour, Angela saw a sign for State Highway 14 and made the turn as instructed. But this road was even worse, narrower, poorly maintained, weaving through increasingly dark forest. Her headlights caught movement in the trees, shadows that seemed to pace her truck, keeping parallel to her speed. Angela's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her phone rang. Steve's number. She answered, "Steve, this route is wrong." Steve's voice responded, but it sounded slightly off now, the inflection not quite matching his usual speech pattern. "No, keep going, you're almost there, trust me, Angela." That phrase bothered her. It was too casual, too unlike his professional manner. Angela asked, testing. There was a pause, too long, then, "Your daughter's name." "Yes, your daughter." The voice trailed off, unable to answer. Steve knew Angela's daughter's name was Rebecca. They'd discussed her college graduation just 2 weeks ago. Whatever was on the other end of this call, it wasn't Steve. Angela hung up and tried to turn around, but the narrow road had no space for a truck her size to reverse direction. She was committed to following this road forward until she found a wide spot or an intersection. The phone rang again, Steve's number, but Angela didn't answer. It kept ringing, 20 times, 30 times, the ringtone filling her cab with false cheer while shadows moved in the forest outside. A voicemail notification appeared. Angela listened to it and her blood ran cold. It was Steve's voice, but wrong, distorted, speaking impossible words. "Angela, I'm not Steve. I've never been Steve. Steve doesn't work nights. Steve is home asleep. I've been guiding you here to this place where we've been waiting so long for someone like you. Keep driving. You'll reach us soon. We're so hungry, Angela." Angela floored the accelerator, panic overriding caution. Her truck bounced and shuddered over the rough road, suspension groaning, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, in the mirrors, lights appeared. Not vehicle lights, but something else. Points of luminescence in the forest, dozens of them, pacing her, watching. The phone rang continuously now, Steve's number over and over, and when she finally answered in desperation to make it stop, all she heard was breathing and whispers in languages that hurt to hear. State Highway 14 ended at a dirt road, not the rejoin with Interstate 30 that Steve's voice had promised, but a rutted track leading deeper into forest that shouldn't exist in northeastern Texas. Angela's GPS showed her position as a blank gray area. No roads, no landmarks, just an empty space on the map where she was supposedly located. She stopped the truck, terror and confusion overwhelming her. She tried every contact in her phone. Her husband, her daughter, her company's main office, even 911. Every number rang once and was answered by that voice, pretending to be Steve, that voice that knew it wasn't fooling her anymore but kept trying anyway. "Angela, turn around, come back, we're right behind you. You can't escape, this road only goes one way." Angela reversed her truck recklessly, crashing through brush, scraping against trees, tearing off her mirrors. She backed up for over a mile until she reached a point where the road was wide enough to turn around. The entire time, that voice spoke to her through her phone, describing what it would do when it caught her. How it would peel away her identity piece by piece, how it would wear her like a skin, use her voice to call other drivers, lure them to this same impossible road. She managed to turn her truck and drove back the way she'd come, pushing her damaged vehicle to its limits. The phone went silent finally, and Angela saw lights ahead. Real lights. Interstate 30, right where she'd exited it, as if the past 2 hours of driving had taken her in a massive circle. She merged back onto the highway and didn't stop until she reached a truck stop 50 miles away, surrounded by other vehicles and people. Angela called her company's main office at dawn, when real dispatchers were on duty. She explained what happened and asked about Steve Patterson. The office manager was confused. "Steve quit 8 months ago, moved to Oregon. We've been using an automated dispatch system since then for night calls." Angela checked her phone records. The number that had called her repeatedly wasn't in the company directory. It wasn't in any directory. When she tried to call it back, a recording stated the number had never been assigned, didn't exist in any active system, but the voicemails were still saved on her phone. That voice pretending to be Steve, then giving up the pretense, revealing its true nature and hunger. She researched similar incidents and found dozens of reports. Drivers receiving calls from dispatchers who'd quit or died. Voices that sounded almost right but weren't. Route changes that led to nowhere or worse. Some drivers followed the fake instructions and vanished. Their trucks found abandoned on roads that weren't on any map, or never found at all. Angela requested transfer to day shifts only, local routes. Never long haul. She changed her phone number, blocked all calls from numbers not in her contacts. But sometimes, late at night, her old number calls her new phone somehow. Impossible but happening. She never answers. She lets it ring until the voicemail picks up. And in the morning, she deletes the messages without listening, too afraid of what that voice might say, what it might know about her life now, how it might try to lure her back to County Road 19, to that dirt track that leads into forest that shouldn't exist, where things that hunger for human existence wait patiently for the next driver to trust the wrong voice. Story number 10, The Fog That Followed. David Kim noticed the fog following him somewhere outside Portland, Oregon, on October 31st, 2021. He was hauling timber to Sacramento, driving Interstate 5 through clear night weather, when a bank of fog appeared in his mirrors around 2:15 a.m. At first, David thought nothing of it. Fog was common in this region, especially in autumn, rolling in from the Pacific to blanket the highways in thick gray soup. But this fog was different. It stayed exactly 1 mile behind him according to his GPS, maintaining that precise distance regardless of his speed. David tested it, slowing to 40 miles per hour, then accelerating to 70. The fog kept pace perfectly, a wall of gray that stretched across all lanes of the highway, advancing at whatever speed ensured it stayed exactly 1 mile back. David had been driving professionally for 17 years, and he'd seen unusual weather patterns. Fog banks that moved against the wind, localized rain that seemed to follow vehicles. But those were explicable, just coincidences of timing and meteorology. This was different. This was deliberate. The fog was tracking him specifically, ignoring other vehicles that passed going the opposite direction. Focused solely on David's truck. He tried changing lanes. The fog adjusted, centering itself on his position. He took an exit, hoping to lose it on surface streets. The fog followed, maintaining its 1 mile distance with precision that was impossible for a natural weather phenomenon. David watched his mirrors obsessively, seeing the gray wall advancing behind him like a living thing, patient and relentless. Around 3:30 a.m., David's truck began having electrical problems. His radio cut out, his GPS flickered, his dashboard lights dimmed and brightened randomly. The fog had closed the distance to half a mile now, and David could see it more clearly. It wasn't normal fog. It moved wrong, swirling in patterns that suggested consciousness, tendrils reaching forward like arms, like something trapped in mist form trying to grasp at his truck. David called his wife on his cell phone, which was still functioning. He explained what was happening, hearing how insane it sounded even as he spoke. His wife suggested pulling over, waiting for the fog to pass. David refused, terrified of what might happen if the fog actually reached him. His wife stayed on the phone, trying to keep him calm, but David could hear the fear in her voice as he described the fog's appearance, its impossible behavior. The fog closed to a quarter mile. David pushed his truck faster, but his engine was losing power, sputtering, as if the fog's proximity was draining his vehicle's energy. His headlights dimmed to barely functional levels. His phone call dropped, and when he tried to reconnect, he heard voices in the static. Whispers in languages he didn't recognize, pleas for help, warnings to run, all overlapping, dozens of voices trapped in that gray wall pursuing him. David saw a rest area ahead and made a desperate decision. He pulled in at high speed, nearly losing control, and parked under the brightest lights he could find. Other trucks were there, and David ran to the nearest one, pounding on the door. A driver emerged, annoyed at being woken, but his expression changed when he saw the fog rolling into the rest area parking lot. The fog stopped at the edge of the lights, unable or unwilling to enter the illuminated space. It pooled there, building up, growing thicker and taller, forming shapes within itself. David and several other drivers who'd emerged to see what was happening watched in horror as the fog coalesced into humanoid forms, dozens of them. Standing at the edge of darkness, staring at David with eyes that glowed faintly within the mist. One of the other drivers, an older man with gray beard, spoke quietly. "I've heard about this. Fog that hunts specific people, old stories going back decades. Some say it's souls of drivers who died in fog-related accidents, trapped, trying to drag others into the gray with them." The fog figures moved closer, testing the boundary of the lights. Where they touched illumination, they recoiled, unable to cross the threshold. But they didn't leave. They waited, patient, and David realized with growing horror that they would wait as long as necessary. He couldn't stay in this rest area forever. Eventually, he'd have to leave, and when he did, the fog would be waiting. David stayed there for 6 hours as dawn approached. The fog never dissipated, never thinned, maintaining its vigil at the edge of the lights. Other drivers who tried to leave found their trucks stalling when they approached the fog barrier. The mist didn't pursue them, focused only on David, but it blocked all exits, trapping everyone in the rest area. Sunrise should have burned off the fog, but it didn't. The gray wall simply retreated from the expanding daylight, staying at the edge of shadows, refusing to dissipate entirely. David attempted to leave, driving toward the exit, and the fog moved with him, maintaining its barrier. He made it back onto Interstate 5, but the fog followed, now keeping pace beside him rather than behind, running parallel to his truck in the trees and fields alongside the highway. Every shadow contained the fog. Every dark underpass or tunnel was filled with it, forcing David to drive through brief moments of absolute gray where voices whispered and cold fingers brushed against his truck. He couldn't avoid it entirely, couldn't find a route that stayed in sunlight constantly. The fog was learning his patterns, predicting his movements, cutting off routes before he could take them. David made it to Sacramento, but the fog arrived with him, filling the streets around his delivery location. He unloaded his cargo in broad daylight, surrounded by people, the fog waiting in alleyways and under bridges. When he tried to leave the city, the fog moved ahead of him, blocking routes, forcing him to take different roads, herding him like predator guiding prey. David abandoned his truck at a crowded mall parking lot and took a taxi to the airport, buying a ticket for the first available flight to anywhere. The fog followed the taxi, rolling through Sacramento's streets, causing accidents as panicked drivers saw the impossible wall of gray pursuing a specific vehicle. At the airport, David ran through the terminal, and security cameras later showed Fulmug pressing against the windows behind him, trying to seep through gaps, desperate to reach him. David's flight took off, and from his window he watched fog covering the airport, swirling in frustrated patterns. But as the plane gained altitude, David saw fog formations in the clouds outside, faces pressed against his window, mouths open in silent screams or hunger. He couldn't tell which. The fog had followed him into the sky. He never went back to trucking. David moved between cities constantly, staying in bright, well-lit areas, never remaining in one place long enough for the fog to fully manifest, but it's always there on the edges. Every foggy day brings the risk that it will recognize him, will remember its hunt, will resume pursuit. David researches constantly, looking for solutions, for explanations, for ways to break whatever curse has marked him. He's found references to similar phenomena throughout history. Mists that hunt individuals, fog that carries voices of the dead, gray veils between this world and another that sometimes targets specific people for reasons unknown. No reliable solutions exist. Some people are hunted until the fog catches them, usually in a moment of darkness or isolation. Others are pursued for years before the fog finally gives up, moving on to new targets. David doesn't know which category he falls into, only that 3 years later he still sees fog gathering in shadows, still hears whispers when gray rolls in from the ocean. He keeps lights on constantly, sleeps during the day, avoids any situation where darkness might trap him. It's not a life, just an existence waiting for either freedom or the moment when the fog finally catches him. When he'll discover what those voices in the gray have been promising all along. What fate awaits those hunted by mist that moves with purpose and hunger. And on foggy mornings, David stands at his window and watches the gray streets, seeing shapes moving within the mist, faces turning toward his apartment. And he knows they haven't forgotten, haven't stopped hunting, or just waiting for their moment to drag him into the fog that never ends. Story 11. The Way Station That Measured Souls. Christopher Hayes pulled into a way station on Interstate 75 in Georgia on July 7, 2017, following standard procedure for his route from Florida to Ohio. Christopher had been a professional driver for 19 years, and way stations were routine, boring parts of his job. He expected to pull onto the scales, get cleared, and be back on the highway in 5 minutes. But when he pulled onto the scales this time, the readout showed numbers that made no sense. Instead of displaying his truck's weight in tons, the screen showed guilt, 847 pounds, shame, 1,243 pounds, regret, 2,105 pounds. Christopher stared at the display, confused, then looked at the way station attendant visible through the window. The attendant was watching him with an expression that wasn't quite human. A smile that contained too much knowledge, eyes that reflected no light despite the bright station interior. The attendant picked up a microphone and his voice crackled through speakers. "Christopher Hayes, your truck is overweight. You're carrying too much." "That's not my truck's weight," Christopher said into his own radio. Those are words. The attendant's smile widened. "These scales measure what matters, Christopher. Your truck weighs 63,000 pounds. That's within legal limits. But you're carrying 4,000 additional pounds of emotional burden. That's what these scales measure, and you're overweight." Christopher tried to drive forward, off the scales, but his truck wouldn't move. The engine ran normally, the transmission engaged, but his truck was locked in place as if held by invisible restraints. The attendant's voice continued. "You can't leave until you're within limits. Everyone who stops here must offload their burdens, that's the rule." Other trucks began pulling into the way station behind Christopher, forming a line. Christopher watched in his mirrors as each truck pulled onto the scales, and each time, the display showed similar readouts: emotional weights, psychological burdens, the invisible cargo that all humans carried quantified and measured. Other drivers had the same confused expressions, same arguments with the attendant, same inability to leave. Christopher exited his truck and approached the way station building. Inside, he found a waiting area filled with other drivers, some looking shell-shocked, others crying, others sitting in silence. "Through there, Christopher. You need to offload." Christopher entered the unloading bay and found a room that shouldn't exist. It was vast, cathedral-sized, though the way station building was small from outside. The space was filled with containers, for lack of a better word. Shelves and boxes and crates containing intangible things. Labeled with emotions, memories, experiences, Christopher saw his name on a section, and the labels matched the scale readout. Guilt, shame, regret. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere. "Choose what to release, and you can leave. But understand, what you offload here is gone forever. You won't remember the events associated with those emotions. The memories will vanish. Guilt about lying to your wife about money problems. Shame about abandoning your father in his final months. Regret about chances not taken, words not spoken." Christopher stood in that impossible room, faced with an impossible choice. His burdens were heavy, had been crushing him for years. The weight of guilt over financial mistakes he'd hidden from his spouse. The shame of not being there when his father died, choosing a delivery deadline over family. The regret of a life half-lived, opportunities missed through fear or laziness or bad timing. He could be free of all that weight, could drive away lighter than he'd been in decades. But the cost was his past. The memories that made him who he was, good and bad, would be erased. He'd lose not just the pain, but the lessons, the growth, the understanding that came from carrying those burdens. He'd be lighter, but less complete, free, but diminished. Christopher refused. "I'm not offloading." The voice responded with what sounded like approval. "That's rare. Most choose to shed their burdens, but you're still overweight." Christopher argued, demanded, threatened, but nothing changed. He was trapped in this way station, in this impossible room, until he agreed to offload enough emotional cargo to meet the arbitrary limits. Hours passed. Christopher sat among his labeled containers of guilt and shame and regret, refusing to choose, refusing to forget. Other drivers came through, made their choices, and left lighter. Some left with smiles, unburdened. Others left looking hollow, freed from pain, but emptied of something essential. Finally, after what felt like 8 hours but was probably less, a different attendant entered. This one looked more human, less wrong. "You're the one refusing to offload. That's unusual," Christopher explained his reasoning. "Pain teaches. Guilt, shame, regret, they're not just burdens, they're information. They tell me who I am, what I've learned." The new attendant nodded. "You're free to go. The way station releases anyone who genuinely chooses to keep their burdens. Most don't. They pretend they will, but they always break eventually, choose to forget. You meant it." Christopher walked out of the unloading bay, through the waiting area, back to his truck. The scales showed his weight as normal now, just his truck and cargo, no emotional burden displayed. He drove onto Interstate 75, merged into traffic, and continued toward Ohio. In his mirror, he watched the way station recede, and as it faded from view, the building flickered, becoming translucent, then vanishing entirely. Where it had been was just empty roadside, no structure, no sign it had ever existed. Christopher researched the location later and found no record of a way station at that mile marker. The nearest official way station was 30 miles away. He spoke to other drivers who traveled I-75 regularly, and some admitted to similar experiences. Way stations that appeared unexpectedly, that measured things other than truck weight, that offered to lighten emotional burdens in exchange for memory. Christopher still carries his guilt about financial mistakes, his shame about not being with his father at the end, his regret about missed opportunities. But he carries them consciously now, accepting their weight as part of who he is. He's become an advocate for drivers struggling with psychological issues, encouraging them to seek help, to address their burdens rather than suppress them. But sometimes on long night drives, Christopher wonders if he made the right choice. He wonders about the drivers who chose to offload, who forgot their pain. Are they happier, more free, or are they hollow, missing essential pieces of themselves, lighter but incomplete? He doesn't know, and he's glad he doesn't have to know. Glad he chose to remember, to feel, to carry his weight even when it's heavy. The way station appears to drivers randomly, Christopher learned from online forums. No pattern to who encounters it, no specific trigger. Just random chance or fate or selection by whatever intelligence operates that impossible place. Some drivers report being offered the chance to offload multiple times. Others encounter it once and never again. Christopher hopes he's in the latter category, hopes he'll never have to make that choice again, never have to stand in that vast room surrounded by labeled containers of pain and decide what pieces of himself he's willing to lose. Story 12. The Passenger Who Never Left. Daniel Foster picked up a passenger on Highway 412 in Oklahoma on November 3, 2016, despite company policy strictly forbidding it. The woman was standing beside a broken-down sedan at 4:17 a.m., clearly stranded, and Daniel's conscience wouldn't let him drive past. He pulled over and offered her a ride to the next town, 15 miles away, where she could call for a tow truck. The woman introduced herself as Sarah and climbed into the passenger seat with gratitude. She was in her 30s, professionally dressed, explaining that her car had simply died, no warning, no obvious mechanical failure. Daniel believed her and started driving toward the next town. They made small talk, the usual conversation between strangers thrown together by circumstance. But as they drove, Daniel noticed something wrong. Sarah didn't blink. He timed it, watching from his peripheral vision, and she never once closed her eyes. She stared forward at the highway with unblinking focus, participating in the conversation but never actually looking at Daniel, never making eye contact. Her voice was normal enough, but something about the rhythm of her speech was off. Pauses in wrong places, emphasis on strange syllables. Daniel dropped her at a gas station in the next town as promised. Sarah thanked him, exited the truck, and walked toward the station's entrance. Daniel watched her go, then pulled back onto the highway. In his mirror, he saw Sarah standing motionless, not going into the station, just watching his truck leave. Then she was gone, simply vanished between one glance and the next, as if she'd never been there. Daniel thought that was the end of it. But an hour later, as he drove through darkness toward his destination, he heard breathing from the sleeper cab behind him. He turned, shining his flashlight through the curtain, and saw nothing. The sleeper cab was empty, but the breathing continued, slow and measured, coming from the passenger seat beside him. The seat was empty. Daniel could see it clearly, but the breathing was there, and the seat's upholstery was compressed as if someone was sitting in it. Daniel pulled over, terrified. He checked every inch of his cab, finding nothing. But the breathing never stopped. It matched his own rhythm, inhaling when he inhaled, exhaling when he exhaled, like something was synchronizing with him, mimicking him, learning him. He tried to sleep at a rest stop, but the breathing was louder in the silence, more present, More real days passed. Daniel completed his delivery and started the return trip. The breathing never stopped. It was always there in the passenger seat, constant company that he couldn't see, couldn't interact with, couldn't escape. He took his truck to mechanics who found nothing. He had the cab professionally cleaned, had the air system checked, had every possible mechanical explanation investigated. Nothing explained the breathing. Daniel began seeing Sarah in his mirrors. Brief glimpses in rest stop parking lots, standing beside other vehicles, always staring at his truck. She never approached, never moved, just watched. Daniel tried to confront her once, running toward where he'd seen her, but she vanished before he got close. Other drivers thought he was losing his mind, chasing empty parking spaces, yelling at nothing. The breathing evolved. It started forming words, whispers so quiet Daniel thought he was imagining them. "Daniel, I'm here. I'm always here. You let me in." He tried every cleansing ritual he could find. Religious blessings, sage burning, salt lines, everything suggested by people who believed in such things. Nothing worked. The breathing continued, the whispers grew clearer, and Sarah's appearances in mirrors became more frequent. Daniel learned eventually, through research and conversations with people who'd experienced similar phenomena, that he'd violated an old rule. Never pick up strangers on empty highways at impossible hours. Some of those stranded travelers aren't human, aren't alive, aren't what they appear. They're things that need invitation to enter vehicles, need to be willingly allowed in. Once invited, once given permission to cross the threshold, they're passengers forever. Daniel drives with Sarah's presence constantly now. 5 years later, the breathing is as consistent as ever. He's learned to coexist with it, to accept that his truck has a permanent occupant he can't see. Sometimes the whispers give him warnings, telling him about road hazards ahead, about dangerous drivers, about weather about to turn bad. Sarah's presence isn't actively harmful, but it's never comforting, always unsettling. A reminder that he made a choice that night on Highway 412 that he can never unmake. Other drivers have reported similar experiences, passengers who never truly leave, presences that occupy vehicles permanently. Hitchhikers who accept rides and then never depart. Daniel has connected with some of these drivers, forming a support network of people who share their cabs with invisible occupants. They trade stories, compare experiences, seek solutions that don't exist. Daniel will never be alone in his truck again. Sarah's breathing is his constant companion. Her whispers his nightly serenade. Her glimpsed figure in mirrors his reminder that kindness, however well-intentioned, can have consequences that last forever. He still helps people when he can, but never on empty highways, never in the dead hours before dawn, never when everything about the situation feels slightly wrong. Because he learned the hard way that some passengers, once invited in, claim their seats for eternity.